Hey everybody, it's Jessica. I'm coming at you with our final Fearful Flipped to Fearless devotional. Today's Wednesday, some day at the end of May. But so we have been going through this series called Fearful Flipped to Fearless, and this one has been mostly about how Jesus' disciples went from being locked in a room, totally afraid for their lives, to being completely fearless and giving their lives for Christ. We talked about Paul, we talked about Peter, we talked about the disciples in general. So that's what this series has been about. And today I'm going to wrap it up with a little bit different take on this one instead of a biblical character. So I'm going to tell you a story about my life and then just relate that to the topic of fear. So when I was about 9 years old, I think, 9 or 10, I was taking a diving class at the local pool during one summer. And one of the skills we were learning was a backflip. And so I have lovely hair sticking up in my head. Anyway, I'd also been taking gymnastics, so I knew how to do a backflip, especially on the floor at the gym, right? But I didn't really know how to do it off of a diving board. So every time I would try, the coach would stand on the diving board and hold my waist and kind of push back a little bit so that I would my momentum would carry me backwards. And then eventually he just stood on the board to absorb some of the bounce. And then the very first time that I went to do it all by myself, I stood on the board and I went straight up and straight down. And I hit my chin on the diving board and scraped like right here and right here. When I came out of the water, I was totally shocked. I think I tried to hold it together and not cry, but I was really scared because you think you're gonna hit water, but you hit your face. And then we had to go to the doctor and they were like, oh, you were really fortunate because if you had hit further back, you could have broken your jaw. And if you had hit further forward, you could have scraped up your whole face. And so as it was, I just had a really sore jaw for a little while and got to eat, soft foods like ice cream and frozen yogurt. But all that to say, because of that experience, I was incredibly fearful of backflips. I wasn't totally afraid of diving boards, but I wouldn't do a backflip off a diving board. I would do them at gymnastics, on trampolines, but not on the diving board until like 9 years later when I was 18 or 19 and I was working at Redwood Camp Mount Hermon for summer staff. And I don't know what got into me, but somebody finally was like, you should just do it. You have to conquer your fear. And so I finally did. And I haven't done a backflip off a diving board for a while now, but I finally did that summer. And I have continued to do that since then. My favorite thing to do is actually to backflip off of rocks up at Kidder Creek. But I don't really do that anymore either because I am now trying to be responsible and realize if I get hit, I'm the one not if I get hit, if I get hurt, I'm the one in charge. And so I can't really take the risk of getting hurt and not being able to drive the bus when all of you are in the bus. But anyway, there's my story about moving from being afraid of something to not letting that fear rule my life. And that's a simple story, but we all have these fears in our lives that grip us, right? And one of my favorite quotes that you'll hear me say again and again, because I love it, is that fear interrupts faith and causes us not to trust. And so that's really the case here with the disciples that we've looked at and in our lives, is that sometimes we have these fears and the fears interrupt our faith, and that means that we are no longer trusting God, right? So I want to ask you, in your life, how are you letting fear interrupt your faith? How is your fear keeping you from trusting God? And we're living in a time where there is a lot of fear. For the last couple months as we've been into this pandemic, there are messages that are meant to instill fear and anxiety in us. So how do we continue to walk in trust, knowing that God is good, knowing that God's got us? How do we not let our fear rule our lives? And one thing that we can do is to hear stories from other people about how they have conquered fear and to look at the Bible. And we can also look at not just stories in the Bible of examples of people that went from fear to faith, but also verses that encourage us to continue in faith and to not be afraid. One of the most repeated commandments in the Bible is do not be afraid. Jesus says that when he's walking on water and sees people and sees his disciples and they're terrified, he's like, hey, don't be afraid. God says it whenever he appears, or when an angel appears. The angel appeared to Mary and he said, don't be afraid. God has found favor with you. So again and again, God tells us to not fear. And one of the most famous verses, and one that I look at a lot of times when I'm afraid, is Joshua 1:9. And it says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I paraphrase that a little bit. But the point is, don't be afraid. Be strong and courageous. There's another verse in Timothy that Paul writes, and it says that God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, right? And so we don't need to be afraid. We don't need to be timid. We don't need to be worried. We have God's spirit of power in us, and we know that God is with us wherever we go. So, in wrapping up this series, don't let your fear interrupt your faith. Continue to trust in God. And if you have questions about that, we would love to talk to you about it. We would love to tell you our experiences. You know, we all have moments of fear, and we all have fears that hold us back. But Jesus came that we would have life and have it abundantly, and He wants us to live a full, good, and healthy life. So we love you guys. Look for some more fun stuff coming soon, and as we move out of this, we will gather together as soon as possible. It will look different. We'll probably have some small groups, but oh, you can hear there's 2 quail that just landed in my yard, by the way. That's what you heard. But we want to be back with you guys and meet with you as soon as possible. So look for more info on that coming soon. Hopefully we'll see you in a matter of weeks. Bye.